A History of Agnostics in AA by Roger C. Introduction. Time to Rally. A few days ago, I got an email from a woman, Emma. It was not at all an unusual email and followed a rather common motif. Emma had spent a bit of time reading various articles on the AA Agnostica website and wanted to know why we agnostics, atheists, and freethinkers didn't start our own movement, our own organization. She even suggested that we might not be real alcoholics. After all, she insisted, a common problem requires a common solution. And the solution to alcoholism was very clear. It was AA, as she understood it. The first 164 pages of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, God, and conference-approved literature. If we agnostics didn't accept that, if that didn't work for us, then perhaps we were not real alcoholics, and we were certainly not legitimate members of AA. I replied with a brief email. My answer is simple, Emma. Tradition 3 is very clear. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. And AA is meant to be a helping hand for any alcoholic who reaches out for help. And for that, each AA member is responsible, according to our responsibility declaration. As for the solution, well, as Bill put it, quote, it must never be forgotten that the purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous is to sober up alcoholics. There is no religious or spiritual requirement for membership. No demands are made on anyone. An experience is offered which members may accept or reject. That is up to them. End quote. See Letter to Father Marcus O'Brien, written in 1943, and quoted in The Soul of Sponsorship by Robert Fitzgerald. If you don't understand or accept this, I really have nothing to add. If you want to impose a specific solution on people, well, AA is the wrong place for that. The conversation was over. She had shared her understanding of AA. I had shared my understanding of AA. We were not going to come to an agreement. That was certain. It got me thinking, though, about AA and the 12 steps and God, and about another quote from the co-founder of AA, Bill Wilson. Quote, in AA's first years, I all but ruined the whole undertaking. God, as I understood him, had to be for everybody. Sometimes my aggression was subtle, and sometimes it was crude. But either way, it was damaging, perhaps fatally so, to numbers of non-believers. End quote. See Grapevine article, The Dilemma of No Faith, 1961. And that led me to question whether AA had become more inclusive over the past 8 decades. Specifically, had Alcoholics Anonymous become more accepting towards non-believers since Bill W. wrote about his aggression and the perhaps fatal consequences that might have been its result? What could our fellowship do to be more accommodating of we alcoholics who attribute our sobriety to an inner resource, see Appendix 2 of the Big Book, rather than to a higher power whom many in AA choose to call God? Big questions. God, I thought, pun intended. It would take a book to answer those questions. And so, here's the book. A History of Agnostics in AA has actually been in the works for the past 6 years. A much shorter version was published in 2011. At the time, my home group had been booted out of Intergroup in Toronto, and I thought it would be helpful to find out how agnostics had been treated over the years in AA. The research could be done online, and it would take, what, a weekend or two? It would take 3 full months. Very little information about we agnostics in AA had been written, recorded, or preserved anywhere. With the support of some wonderful people, specifically William White, the author of Slaying the Dragon, A History of Addiction Treatment and Recovery in America; Ernie Kurtz, the author of Not God, A History of Alcoholics Anonymous; and Michelle Mirza, the chief archivist at the AA General Service Office in New York. A 27-page essay called A History of Agnostic Groups in AA was put together and published online in September 2011. This book contains most everything that was in that essay, and much more, including information shared over the years and articles posted on AA Agnostica. And this book is divided into 3 main parts. The first part is called Our History. It begins with a bit of an overview, an agnostic in AA, and then recounts our early history beginning with Jim Burwell, one of the very first agnostics in AA, and moves on to the launching of the first agnostic meetings in cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York. It also deals with the not uncommon and relatively recent rejection of agnostic groups and meetings by intergroups in Canada and the United States. It has a chapter on changing the 12 steps, as they were written and published in 1939, as that issue has often generated controversy. Finally, Part 1 deals in some detail with the expulsion of agnostic groups by the Greater Toronto Area Intergroup and how this matter was brought before a human rights tribunal and ultimately resolved. The next part is about problems in AA. There are a few of these for we agnostics, atheists, and freethinkers. First, we look at special composition groups, such as women, black and young people, and the LGBTQ community for 2 important reasons, so that we secularists in AA understand that we are not alone in sometimes being treated as outcasts, and in order to understand how the problems faced by these groups were dealt with by AA, both at the local level and by the General Service Office. Also discussed is the emergence of religious movements within the fellowship, as well as some characteristics of conventional AA, such as its religiosity and tendencies towards conformity. Finally, we write about the lack of conference-approved literature by, about, and for non-believers in AA, in spite of efforts to produce such literature that go back to the 1970s. As it should and must be, the third and final part of the book is called Moving Forward. We begin by looking at the explosion of non-conference approved literature for non-believers in AA. We then have chapters about our first 2 conventions in Santa Monica, California, and Austin, Texas, and, in a chapter between these 2, Progress, Not Perfection. We admit to having had our own imperfections in the planning and organization of these 2 remarkable and historical conventions. The final chapters deal with the growth of our secular movement in AA and who we are. The appendices contain secular versions of how it works, as well as the histories of the launch and growth of 10 secular groups in Canada. In 2009, there was 1 agnostic group in Canada, while today there are 25 in 5 different provinces. The stories of these groups engage and inform in an encouraging sort of way. A third appendix shares a few articles originally posted on AA Agnostica. The whole book is all about 2 things: First is the identification of the problems faced by we agnostics, atheists, and freethinkers in AA, and these can be broken down into one simple fact. We don't attribute our sobriety to a supernatural higher power, nor need we in AA. Read Tradition 3, and as Bill W. put it, quote, all people must necessarily rally to the call of their own particular convictions, and we of AA are no exception. All people should have the right to voice their convictions, end quote. See General Service Conference, 1965. And second, the book is about how these problems could and should be dealt with as our secular movement gains momentum within AA. There is no longer a fake-it-until-you-make-it approach to being a non-believer in AA. That's over. That's history. Let us all acknowledge that to thine own self be true is a healthy and essential approach to long-term sobriety. It's time to rally, and we shall rally to the call of our own particular convictions, and we shall do that within our AA fellowship. To read the original print version of this article, which contains clickable hyperlinks to references, just visit aagnostica.org and search for Introduction, Time to Rally, posted April 20, 2017. For more audio versions of our articles and stories, simply visit